I'm very pleased to be joined today by Dr. Frank Richter, Chairman of Horasis, the global business community. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for inviting me. A great pleasure, and I think it's the right time to talk about risk and this gloomy state of the world.
Correct. Frank, you just recently concluded the Horasis annual meeting 2012 in Zurich, Switzerland, with a theme that I think is extremely interesting, namely thriving on risk. I'd love to delve into some of the takeaways from the meeting, but before we do that, would you please tell us how you started Horasis and what the mission of the organization is?
Well, Horasis is a global business community. We organize 5 large-scale events every year focusing on emerging markets. I used to look in the world from an OECD angle, basically North America and Europe, and I think everybody did in the past, but now the growing economies of the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India and China, are taking over. Not only taking over, but they are the new engines of growth. What we would like to provide is some foresight on how the world is developing and also supporting those emerging countries drive for globalization to help to establish brands overseas and also to make the world a better world. We see so many imbalances in this world. We see a lot of unemployment now in Europe. We see inflation in Asia. We see, of course, a lot of geopolitical tensions. What we really need is dialogue. We have to bring the different stakeholders together to create a platform where people can not only talk, but think about tangible and sustainable solutions. So the idea of Horasis really is to be a platform for dialogue where stakeholders from emerging countries, from OECD countries can meet and look into joint projects to drive and to sculpture the future. I believe that coming together and building a platform for trust building is extremely important for business as well, because nobody will go into a business today without having this platform for trust where people can meet and talk.
Wonderful, and I think this last event that you just concluded in Zurich had an amazing list of participants, global business leaders as well as political leaders. And what struck me was just how focused the event was on practical solutions, specifically the theme of thriving on risk. Was there a consensus, and if so, what was it, and if not, what were the various views that were expressed at the meeting?
It is a Horasis annual meeting with around 120 CEOs joining us from around 42 countries. We also got a few public figures involved, including the Prime Minister of Latvia, the Malaysian Minister of Trade and the Minister President of Flanders. They came from all different corners, from all around the world, but we, at the end of the day, we found a consensus saying that we have to join hands and to jointly think about solutions. And we should stop to point fingers. It's very fashionable now to point fingers to European leaders and saying what's happening in Europe is not good. Europe is kind of driving the world down into very bad malaise. And what we have to do is to regain a view on a balanced state of the world where both emerging countries and established countries can work together. The theme indeed was thriving on risk, and we looked into the different risk factors in this world today, and there are many risks out there. Of course, the euro is a major risk, the currency in Europe. Inflation, I mentioned before, unemployment, social unrest. What we have to do now is to have a positive attitude, to thrive on risk, to understand the different risk factors and to find solutions where companies and societies at large can thrive and rebuild the future.
So if you're a business leader today looking to position a global corporation to not only survive this period of crisis, but in fact benefit from it, what are some of the things you would think about or look into doing?
I think one important paradigm is the paradigm of outsourcing and offshoring. Today we live in a virtual world. You can outsource and offshore almost everything, even your headquarter, but definitely your R&D, your manufacturing. Take Apple, for example. Apple is very much a virtual organization and not owning manufacturing anymore. It's all done in China or in other markets, creating employment actually in those markets, which is also good for society. And at the end of the day, I think we have to find solutions where things can done best at the best price and the best time somewhere in the world. And I think Europe is still very good in certain things when it comes to high tech, when it comes to research, when it comes to high-end brands like in the automotive industry, take a BMW or Porsche. I think these things will always be here in Europe, but I think Europe will lose mass manufacturing. It's something of the past, and maybe in Europe we have to consciously abandon certain sectors in manufacturing and give it to Asia, give it to the emerging countries, and to find a new repartition of work around the world. I think that's just some ideas, and I very much believe in virtual organizations. Again, outsourcing, globalization is key. Maybe in the future companies might only have 5, 10, 100 employees in a small headquarter, maybe a virtual headquarter, somebody sitting in London, somebody else in Beijing and Tokyo, and all the rest is done by other people around the world. What we really need to put all this together is leadership, a strong sense for leadership, somebody with charisma leading an organization, leading a company, and being able actually to create some common values in this organization, to get everything into one direction and to have a great value added to the customers.
I think in the report summarizing the findings from your annual meeting, you mentioned that the last decade was widely viewed as the decade of globalization, very favorably so. Now in this decade, globalization has become somewhat of a contested word. What do you think business leaders can do to ensure that protectionism doesn't take over because of the challenges that a lot of countries face?
Globalization indeed was the buzzword of the last decade, and we face now a phase of deglobalization, where people even go on the street. Think about the Occupy Wall Street movement, and people there, I think they're right. You know, if you think about all the power centered in Wall Street and all the other people around who can't really share this power, people think about the benefits of globalization, if benefits really are out there, and if benefits of globalization can spur the world into the right direction. I believe that globalization is here to stay. I think we can't put it back. We can't go back to the nation state. We can't go back to a world where countries fight against each other. Companies are always in stringent competition. What we need is a world of cooptation, where competition and cooperation coexist. And I feel that globalization doesn't have to mean that everybody is eating the same kind of food or drinks the same kind of drinks. Still, we have our local food, and I think we should be proud of our local food, of our local taste, of our local ambitions. But still, in a globalized world, we can try to give the benefits to all the actors involved, and it's not a zero-sum game. I believe it's a positive-sum game where everybody can win.
Many of our viewers are shareholders of global corporations that operate in some jurisdictions that have had some issues, such as China or Russia. What is your view on how those countries that need to catch up can best do so, and are you optimistic that they indeed will join the global community in all aspects, including legal and shareholder rights?
See, we host every year the 4 big country meetings exactly on those markets you mentioned, on China, on Russia, India, and the Middle East. And when you look from a New York or London perspective, of course you will see that they're not using the so-called Anglo-Saxon model, very much based on transparency, shareholder rights, good corporate governance. So I think the so-called Asian model is, or maybe the model of state capitalism, is even competing with the Anglo-Saxon model. But I see that many Chinese companies, let's talk about China for a second, are trying to adopt a more Western model as they're now going for IPOs listings outside China. It's quite fashionable to list in London, New York, or Frankfurt, or even Zurich. And here, of course, have to comply with best global standards. I think the pendulum is kind of swinging back and forth. You know, sometimes we feel a bit more the Anglo-Saxon, sometimes more the Chinese model, and maybe the truth is in between. The true strength of the Chinese model actually is a very long-term perspective. In the Anglo-Saxon model, you have a very short-term orientation. You have to boost your share price. And just if I would say it black and white, it's sometimes better to fire people to boost your share price. At least in the past, it was always perceived to be good news. But maybe it's bad news for the people involved and for the productivity of your company. In the Chinese ways, managers and owners very much look into long-term development and even in a kind of a co-development with society. I've been to Shanghai recently, and I went to an interesting place called the Museum on the Future. It's basically a museum where you can see how Shanghai and China will look like in around 40, 50 years from now. I believe, you know, this kind of view is not really existing in the Western world, where we always go for quarterly reporting and the boosting of our share price. So again, I think the truth might be in between, and I would wish that we in the Anglo-Saxon world would also adopt some elements of the Chinese or Asian model.
Mm-hmm. And talking about imbalances that exist not only among countries, but also within countries and among folks of different economic fortunes, were there any ideas for how to deal with those imbalances and bring them perhaps in line with historical norms? What came out of the meeting on that topic?
There was a very interesting discussion with the Prime Minister of Latvia, and you know that Latvia was one of the first countries going into a very deep structural crisis in 2008, when the crisis came over from the Atlantic and hit Europe. Latvia was hit first, and I think in 2008, 2009, the GDP shrank by around 15%. What the Prime Minister, a very young Prime Minister, in his mid-30s did in the beginning actually was to cut expenditure and fiscal austerity. Austerity was really the talk of the day. Today actually everybody wants to copy Latvia and is not actually able to do so. You know, Greece has a lot of issues, people go on the street, but Latvia really was driving it through and was able to refix the economy. Imbalances, yes, Latvia had very important and striking imbalances. But now I think the crisis is over in Latvia, and Latvia is slowly growing again. And maybe it's a better Latvia now with a stronger middle class. Before we had a few of those so-called oligarchs you find in most Eastern European countries, very wealthy entrepreneurs, and almost no middle class. And the big chunk of society actually was poor, living on maybe 300-400 euro per month. Now we see a rising middle class, and Latvia was able to boost middle class and to shrink the imbalances. I wish other countries would copy this model, but you need really a social contract where everybody is behind this model, behind this proposal, and you need a very good leadership from the top.
I'm sure there was also discussion of some of the problem economies within the EU and how those debt issues and other issues might get resolved. Was there a consensus on what is likely to happen in Europe, and also on what should happen?
It's a very interesting question. Actually, we had people from 42 countries, as I mentioned before, and I think you can't really reach a consensus when it comes to Greece, for example. The country really in the center of the discussion. Most of our American friends actually that just said, let them go. There's no way to throw money after Greece. The country is basically bankrupt, and you should stop and go for a fresh start. And maybe viewing Greece as a new emerging country where many things are possible, where maybe Chinese investors might come in, maybe Russians come in and have a different migration policy and buy real estate on some Greek islands. So maybe a new model for Greece. This was a view of our American friends. Most Europeans at the meeting had the idea of further supporting the meeting, out of supporting Greece out of solidarity, saying we can't let them go. It's impossible. You know, if Greece is falling, the whole of Europe might fall. The few participants from Asia, Africa, Latin America, they actually supported more the American view and say, you know, what's happening in Europe might even train down the rest of the world, and we have to fix the problem. But I think fixing Greece is almost impossible. So let them go and try to keep the large economies of Spain, Italy, Ireland, even France, of course, is facing now some difficulties, keeping them afloat and trying to keep together the rest of the Eurozone.
In your report, you say that the outlook for 2012 was rather cautious among many of the business leaders. Why do you think that is? And if we do have a major global recession in 2012, what should be the policy response?
I think there will be a recession. We're already feeling it now here in Europe. There's some optimistic signals in the US. You know, the employment figures are actually quite good. And we see a divide between Europe and the rest of the world. Some people call actually the time we are facing in Europe a so-called lost decade. Remember what happened in Japan 20 years ago? It was like a balance sheet recession. Some people said no growth, stagnation, deflation, and basically also silvering of society, not enough young kids, and of course huge pension fund liabilities, a lost decade. Japan for the first time actually is now a trade balance deficit, and it was always on the contrary. And you see what can happen to Europe, I think, just following this Japanese model. And I'm not sure, you know, really how to solve it. I think what we have to do maybe is to rethink our whole social framework here in Europe. You know, when we see what's happening on a Friday afternoon, people go back, leave the office at around maybe 1 o'clock, even earlier. They go to the mountains, to the lakes, to the seashore, and come back on Monday morning during the weekend. People usually even not using their Blackberries. That's a bit the European attitude. And very long vacations, 6 to 7 weeks. I think we have to change this to be more competitive and going back to a 2 to 3 weeks vacation type of schedule. And we have to rediscover our hard work. I think that's what we did 50 years ago after the war. And we lost it because, you know, we are a bit of complacent now, and we're getting very, very lazy.
It seems that we've learned how to live the good life when a lot of people in Asia are working very hard at reaching the standard of living that we enjoy in Europe. Do you think that these very difficult structural issues and also just issues of mentality can be fixed, and how do you go about trying to do that?
I think it all starts with education. If you look into the vision of a young European, young American, maybe is to go into the healthcare business, to maybe like a ski instructor, and to enjoy life. In Asia, it's quite different. Maybe read the famous book called The Tiger Mom, which is written by a Chinese American, saying that, you know, hard work, it's the way to go, and from very young age, basically pushing your kids to learn the piano, to go to school, to learn languages. And we are not doing this in Europe anymore. Of course, there's always the elite, people going to Oxford, Stanford, and Harvard, but it's just a minority. But what I see now, it's very interesting that even Asians now are discovering the European style of life. I go to China quite often, and I see that young couples during the weekend go shopping. And shopping really is shopping for European luxury goods. And they're spending money. They're now spending a lot of money to travel. And what I see also is that in some coastal areas in Asia, in China, work is getting too expensive. And work is now shifting to places like Vietnam, Indonesia, even Laos, and maybe recently to Myanmar. So Chinese now start to outsource and offshore, and they start to enjoy life. So we see a circle, And I would not be, surprised to see China maybe in 10, 15 years experiencing the same kind of problems we have in good old Europe.
There have been some academic papers or concepts around, is there another way to measure how well an economy or a country is doing rather than just looking narrowly at GDP, and perhaps including some other measures like quality of life or quality of the environment? We know in some emerging countries economic growth has come at quite high a price, and in some inner cities it's the air quality is very low. What's your view on some kind of a more holistic, perhaps, assessment of how well the world is doing?
I lived in Beijing in the 1990s, and one reason actually, or the most important reason I left Beijing was the quality of air. It's just not a place you would like to stay for a few more 4 weeks or even years. And then of course traffic. Traffic is something horrible in those mega cities. I just spent last week in Moscow, and you spend a lot of time just in traffic, which is awful because you lose so much time. It's so much stress. You're always late to your appointments. So can I go to a city like Zurich or to smaller places here in Europe with a high quality of life? And I think that's maybe the right measurement, not just the quantitative numbers of GDP, but measuring the quality of life. There's an interesting country, we all know it, it's Bhutan in Asia, and they are measuring actually the happiness in the country, saying, it's important to see that the citizens are happy. Of course, it's very difficult to measure happiness. How can you measure? And you can maybe just ask, how do you feel? And people in Bhutan maybe can't really give you a comparison because they don't really know how happy people are in the outside world. But yes, I think we have to add a second layer to GDP, which is measuring quality of life, happiness, education, and all that together. I've been to another interesting place recently, to Macau. Macau, part of China, actually has the highest life expectancy in the world. And maybe it's a good food because there's a lot of fish and good Chinese food, but it's also because there's not much stress in the city. In Hong Kong, just next door, there's a lot of stress. In Macau, it's a very easygoing life. Of course, I'm very happy to have the casinos, and a lot of mainland Chinese come on to gamble. It's a very easygoing life, but I would say, why not? If an economy can grow, and Macau is also a very high GDP by the way, but life expectancy is very important, and also the social context, the time we can spend with our families. I think that's very important.
You have tremendous intelligence within your community on global events, given that you really are focused on emerging markets in some of the countries that some other events perhaps neglect to some extent. I'm wondering what sorts of opportunities and challenges do you see arising from the Arab Spring and some of those folks finally starting to live in freedom?
We originally did events on China, India, and Russia, the BRIC countries. The B is still missing, actually, in America we are working on. But from the beginning we said we should also include the Arab countries. And they are not really part of the BRICS, it's a different kind of animal. And the Arab world, in a way, is divided. We have the poor countries of Northern Africa, of the Levante countries, and of course the Gulf countries. Take Doha and Abu Dhabi, two of the wealthiest cities on earth, and actually Qatar is now the richest country on earth. So quite a spread around the Arab world, and we've seen still there's quite the same model in those countries where you have a very strong government which is not democratically elected, and this led to of course difficulties in terms of human rights, in terms of expression of your views, in terms of even entrepreneurship, as many of those countries are state-driven with large state-owned economies. When we created our Global Arab Business Meeting in 2010, it's held actually in the UAE, in the Emirates. We had the issue of education, the issue of participation society very high on the agenda. And we've been very lucky to work with the ruler of Ras Al Khaimah, one of the Emirates, to work on the agenda and try to spur development not only in the UAE but around in the Arab world, focusing on education. And we've been launching several initiatives around education where young people in the Arab world can really grasp now opportunities and realize their dreams. What we see now in this so-called Arab Spring, and it's actually not a spring anymore, it's a very cold winter, because we see that in most countries the Arab Spring movement came to a halt. Take Egypt. Mubarak is gone, but the military took over. Now we just elected a new government, but we really don't know yet the direction. We don't know if it's a very extremist government or is it more like a liberal government. So it's still all open, and I wish the Arab region all the best. And if we can give and make a small contribution to the betterment of the situation, we will do it as Horasis, because we invite the main business leaders from the region to join hands and to think about strategies, how to overcome youth unemployment and to give the Arab world a new economic hope.
Economically, the Gulf countries have really excelled over the past decade. Do you believe that they have diversified in some respects, perhaps a little bit away from oil and gas, or are they going to be in a lot of trouble if there is a downturn in the energy markets?
Right, some of the countries definitely diversified. Take Dubai, for example. Dubai very much went into the whole area of tourism, lifestyle, but also IT, education, and new industries. Some people say that Dubai even diversified too much, putting too much money into the sand. I think Dubai went the right way, because you can't just live from your oil and gas reserves. You need more, and you need to develop a sustainable model for your economies to thrive also in the future. Now, I see some countries, and you mentioned Qatar before, trying to build very much strength in research and development. There's, for example, the Science and Development Foundation in Doha, where now a lot of multinationals actually put their R&D facilities into Doha. And Doha itself also trying to diversify by using its own sovereign wealth fund, investing into the car industry in Europe, investing into the chemical industry, investing into the IT industry. So I think it's the right thing to do, and of course those countries are also lucky as they have got the money to do it. But they should maybe also support some of their poorer neighbors in the Arab world, including Egypt, Levante, Morocco, Tunisia, and of course now Libya. Libya needs to be reconstructed, and I think the Arab League should take a major role in reconstructing Libya, and maybe Syria in the future, helping the Arab peers to grow.
Let's talk just a bit about Russia. You have the Global Russia Business Meeting in Luxembourg this year. Recently, equity market valuations have been very low in Russia due to corporate governance concerns. What's your view on whether Russia is going forward truly and how it can go there? What's your view on the likely political landscape, perhaps looking a couple of years out, and then how the businesses in Russia are evolving?
Well, I'm just back from Russia and some fresh thoughts on what happened. I even experienced the protests on the streets of Moscow last Saturday, and you feel there's certainly some change in the air. People are, trying to see where the future Russia will be going, which direction. President Medvedev was talking about modernization a lot and saying Russia is too much depending on oil and gas, and he's right to think so, and he's putting a lot of efforts into trying to build an IT sector, a strong R&D base in Russia. Maybe you heard about the Skolkovo project, which is a large cluster of IT development, similar to the Silicon Valley, or Rosnano, the same thing in the area of biotechnology. So they're trying to diversify the economy, and I think it's the right thing to do, because still now today Russia's economy is so much depending on the oil price. When the oil price is going up, Russia's economy is doing very well, maybe growing even in the area of 7, 8, 9%. When the oil price is down, it's suddenly and immediately a minus growth. So Russia has to balance it, and Russia has to find new governance structures, a bit adopting the Western model. We talked about it before, and going for better global governance. When you look from the outside world, you feel that FDI, foreign direct investment, in Russia could be much, much better. It's lack of trust in the Russian rule of law. Many foreign direct investors go through China, go to Indonesia, go to other countries. But Russia, it's such a wealthy country, such a highly educated country, and it deserves much more FDI. I think Russia should actively attract FDI and work on those investment conditions. I know that, for example, the Vice Prime Minister Shuvalov is working on it and is going even like on investor tours around the world, meeting large companies and trying to convince them to invest into Russia. And we see some first results, some automotive companies now setting up operations in Russia. The pharmaceutical sector is very strong in Russia. What Russia has to do now is to develop also its own brands. There are not many Russian brands, maybe beside the vodka, beside some other areas from the Soviet period. But there are some players like Kaspersky Software. Kaspersky Software is one of the most famous software in the antivirus area. It's of Russian origin, and it's a global brand. And I think Russia needs many more brands like Kaspersky in the future.
Frank, you've built a truly unique platform with Horasis. How can global business leaders become involved with your organization?
Horasis is a very open organization, so we invite CEOs of large companies, but also CEOs of smaller companies, startup companies. We don't have really the bottom line or like the line saying you have to have at least 4 to 5 to 10 billion turnover. We invite everybody who is interested in what we do, and the most important thing is to contribute to the discussions and to our projects. We very much focus on China, India, Russia, the Middle East, but we are also planning activities focusing on Latin America and on Africa in the future. So we are really I think maybe the only platform in the world, all encompassing emerging markets, trying to help them to grow into true global multinationals, but also helping multinationals to invest in those countries. I mentioned Russia before, trying to work on the investment climate in a country like Russia. I think we can do it because we are independent, we are Swiss-based, we are not working on behalf of a government. Still, we have a very benign approach. We work together with governments and trying to join hands to improve investment conditions. So very much, I would say, welcome to CEOs from emerging countries, from Europe, from North America as well. And we would really like to create the new platform for dialogue and for business.
As mentioned earlier, there are really 5 major events you do: the annual meeting in Zurich, the Russia business meeting, the Global India business meeting, the Global China business meeting, and the Global Arab business meeting. Where should business leaders go to actually contact you and become involved with those events?
Well, we got our website, horasis.org. All the information is on the website. What is really happening now, we are not doing advertising, we are not promoting the meetings in a big way. What's happening now is really the power of word of mouth. People are talking about it, and people usually get in other friends, CEOs involved in these meetings. So the meetings are growing every year. We have 300 to 400 participants, and the meetings are always hosted outside the country in focus. So the China meeting was hosted in Valencia in Spain last year. This year will be held in Riga in Latvia. We're always going for unusual places. You know, Chinese CEOs usually are not going to Latvia, but this is a very fact why it's so interesting for them to go, discovering new business opportunities and trying to find peers in those respective countries. The host governments like Latvia, like Spain, are very much involved in the process of setting up the meeting. Usually a prime minister or a minister is welcoming participants from China, India, Russia, or the Arab world. But it's not only a bilateral meeting, it's really a global meeting. We have participants from all around the world joining us. I remember at our last China meeting in Spain, we got quite a good number of participants from Latin America, which is obvious because it was held in Spain, and from Africa. So many Africans flew into Valencia to meet Chinese CEOs. So we see really the true global nature of these meetings, and we try to be very, in a way, heterogeneous, because we want to have different actors attending. From China, we have both the state-owned sector and the private sector attending. And sometimes we feel that those Chinese companies meet for the first time at our meeting, because the state-owned players and the private players are totally different, it's a different world, but we combine them in one meeting when we gather on an annual basis. So we would like to continue this model, and I think over the years the meetings build a certain brand. In China, many of the leading Chinese CEOs know about the meeting and even knock on the door. So it's not that we have to push participants to come. On the contrary, they want to come and join us, and we have to keep the meeting still small and intimate. If the meeting is growing, it's getting bigger, I think you lose a bit the intimacy. And we think the size of 300 to 400 CEOs is just the right size, where you can still meet, talk, and become friends.
And that's really what struck me, I think. If events become too big, they become essentially photo opportunities, but the real hard work, it strikes me, is getting done at events such as the Horasis meetings, and so I'm very encouraged to see so many business leaders from around the world getting together and actually working on some of the hard problems that we're facing.
I think it's really key, and it's maybe the key to create this atmosphere of friends, of peers who meet in a way like gathering around a fireplace atmosphere. We don't really script our sessions too much. We just put people into the room. It's very open and free-willing discussions. Of course, there are other big meetings around in the world. There's a big meeting happening here in the Swiss Alps every year, and I believe those meetings are just getting too big. And there are maybe 30 or 40 prime ministers coming in, and they just go for the next big headline in the media. And what we want to do really is to work and to provide solutions at the end of the day, where everybody in the room can participate. So that's a bit our model, and I think we're on the right way and the right avenue.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for your time. I really endorse your mission and wish you continued success with Horasis.
Thanks so much, John. I appreciate it.